Guys, this is Gamer Cow. Welcome to another Pokemon Trading Card Game History video. We're on to a much better set than last time, so I'm definitely excited to talk about Brilliant Stars. Brilliant Stars is the Arceus set, and it introduces a new mechanic as well in the Pokemon V-Star. V-Star Pokemon are evolutions of Pokemon V. They are not like VMAXs because they have less HP, but they only give up 2 prizes, and they have a special V-Star power. Unlike the last time with GX attacks, these can be abilities as well. For example, the Shaman over here, if you use it during your turn, all of your grass bench Pokemon can get healed by 120. It's still a once per game thing, just like GX attacks were, but not all of them are attack based this time. And that opens up some massive possibilities. The first thing that we saw during this was the Arceus VSTAR to introduce the mechanic, and its ability reads insane, right? Search your deck up to 2 cards, put them into the hand. Just like Prime Catcher recently, this has been like a how do you top this sort of moment. And I think they do that a lot with the new mechanics in the last few generations, and even going all the way back to Gen 5, right? How do you top Mewtwo EX, right? This is just something that it sells the mechanic, right? And you kind of you go and think, well, how can they make it more interesting and more powerful than this, right? Otherwise, this set's got a lot of cool cards in it. It does introduce the character rare type stuff in as well that we see nowadays. There's not as many of them in here, but they do reprint some old cards in this particular one. Nowadays, it's all for the cards in the same set, but you know, this is just bringing some new stuff in, including some of the evolutions as well. I will be using this artwork if I do use the Sylveon from here on out. There's a cool Karen based like Umbreon too, but it's not the moon based one, so I didn't want to play it. There's a couple of promos in here. There is a Morpeko V-Union that came out as well at this time, the last of the V-Unions, but it's so bad that I don't even really want to talk about it, so I'm not even going to include it down here. These two are at least marginally interesting, the Leafeon more than the Glaceon, but we'll go into that as we go. There's a couple of honorable mention stuff in trainers that I'm not going to speak about here as well. Like Kindler is kind of cool, but is just ultimately too hard to work with. Marnie's Pride is neat because there is a Morpeko that works with it over here, but neither of them are particularly strong, so there's just not much point in going over them. And ultimately, there's a lot to talk about within this set that's actually good. So yeah, the last honorable mention I want to go with, because somebody did try and make this work, is the Empoleon. This one like almost made it into the interesting stuff. If it's in the discard pile and you don't have any cards in your hand, you can put it on the bench and draw 3. So it's very similar to that Greninja GX, but instead of being the last card in hand, it has to just be in the discard. The problem is it doesn't do anything, right? 60 Snipe is just terrible. If it had any sort of payoff attack, then I'd be actually loving this card, but it doesn't, so it's kind of garbage. As far as stuff which actually is good though, the main archetype from this is Arceus. This is the monster of the week for this time round, and it's largely fueled by Double Turbo energy here as well. Double Turbo is the retrain of Double Colorless energy. Straight up Double Colorless was kind of broken from its reintroduction in Heart Gold Soul Silver. Nowadays we do trend to a lot more colorless based attacks, so they had to rework it, and Twin Energy was the first one where it can't be used on a Raw Box Pokemon, but this one lowers the damage of the target by 20. So any damage it would do, bench or active, is reduced, and that makes it fair because this does make you miss critical KOs sometimes, but it's also still double colorless and sees immediate and widespread play, not just in Arceus, but even Mew, like had a completely different build style based solely on this card. You know, DTE Mew is insane, so yeah, we're not going to be seeing that this round, but we will definitely visit it in the future for sure. Arceus itself is a 220 HP Pokemon V with 2 retreat that evolves into a 280 HP V-Star. They kind of have very similar sort of effects on the stuff here. Power Edge is just a straight 3 colorless for 130, so you can KO some single price stuff with that, which is kind of okay. Trinity Charge is what you'd be attacking with if you're going to attack with this Arceus though. For a double turbo energy, you accelerate up to 3 basic energy from your deck to your Pokemon V in any way that you like. This can include Arceus itself, so you can attach active if you think you're going to survive, but most of the time you're going to be attaching to the bench with this thing. But it can attach to other copies of Arceus, and it can spread out the energy however you want to. You do not have to attach to the same Pokemon with everything. This effect goes into the Trinity Nova attack of the Arceus VSTAR as well, where you get the same effect, but now you do 200 damage alongside that. So you get to accelerate energy to your future attackers and do a hefty chunk of damage, which is going to two-shot practically everything, even after a double turbo nerf. So that's really strong. But as I mentioned earlier, the main thing about this is the V-Star power, which lets you search any 2 cards out of your deck once per game. Unbelievable, to be honest. This usually searches out the double turbo energy, because that's the hardest bit to get access to. But it's also capable of searching out like Path to the Peak, because if you've already used your Pokemon V's ability, you don't need any other ones, right? So just get the Path to stop the opponent from being able to do the same thing. Really, really strong. Obviously, there is a myriad of different things to this. I'm going to break tradition real quick and just show like my test folder for the stuff here, because I've built practically every single Arc variant from this format that did well in tournament play, and there's almost 20 different versions of it, just from real life tournaments, because as with Fusion Strike, we actually have IRL tournament data to go on now. There's ICs and stuff for here as well. So there are so many of these decks which are Arceus plus something. It's just insane how many different things it can work with. And it can work with a lot of stuff coming up as well. Really, really versatile card. It's the kind of thing that I don't mind being at the top of the meta because of that, right? It just kind of does things, you know? It is very exploitable in the sense that it has a fighting weakness though. Although, it being colorless, there's a Dunsparce that came out in the previous set that can remove weakness from colorless Pokemon. So it can even have that part like chipped off of it as well. Air Balloon compatible, super, super strong card. As far as the trainer stuff goes here, we've got 2 reprints basically. Choice Belt is the spiritual reprint. This is Choice Band, but specifically for Pokemon V. 30 more damage done to the opponent's active V Pokemon. Most decks are going to play at least 1, usually 2 or 3 of this thing, because it makes certain KOs actually possible now, which is really good. Yeah, Choice Band did exactly the same thing for the previous mechanics, so it's a pretty solid one to have in general. The real reprint here is Ultra Ball. Ultra Ball is just ridiculous in general, right? Discard 2 cards, search your deck for any Pokemon. This can actually search pieces of the V-Unions as well, so you may be able to actually build an Arceus V-Union deck at this point, because the Arceus can accelerate to V-Unions, nothing wrong with that, so that's pretty cool. And this serves as both a discard outlet for the V-Unions, but also as a way to search them. Because of their specific name designation, you can't use things like Quick Ball to search them, because they're not basics. This can search for whatever, so it is really strong. And not every deck is going to play 4, but most decks are going to play this, and we have to relearn how to work with like Ultra Ball discards in this format. Very powerful card. Mew VMAX loves this as well, because they can discard surplus cards more than Quick Ball would do, so very powerful. Acerola's Premonition almost isn't worth noting, but there is a Mimikyu that I want to mention with this as well. You reveal the opponent's hand and draw a card for every trainer that you find there. This isn't typically going to draw very many cards, unfortunately, and it doesn't do what Getsis did and like discard those trainers, so it's not super great. But I mean, at least getting some hand knowledge might be useful. It could work. You could work out how to build the rest of your turn based on what the opponent has in hand. But we don't have like hand disruption that we could use with this. Maybe Feeble, I suppose, but seems pretty bad. What you actually want to use this with though is the Mimikyu VMAX. We have the Mimikyu V that was reprinted actually in this set too. Same as before, it's you bench it and it doesn't get affected by like attacks next turn. But it's mostly for the VMAX here. 300 HP, pretty frail for the VMAXs, but for a double turbo energy, you put 4 damage counters on the opponent's Pokemon however you want. not super great, but if you played Acerola's Premonition, you put 13 damage counters down instead. So this is very similar to the old Blacephalon that was played in the Malamar decks. Obviously, big difference is this is a free prizer, but also it is not like standard Mimikyu that doesn't have a weakness. This one is weak to Dark, and that kills its viability, unfortunately. It's going to get caught in the crossfire of MewVmax, right? Most decks, a lot of Arceus-based decks as well, will play Dark-based Vs and whatnot, and so this just gets killed for free prizes too. Unfortunately, not strong enough, but I wish it was, because it's a really cool idea to be able to put 13 counters down whenever you want. Super neat. Another card right next to it, which is a cool gimmick, but not necessarily super strong, is the Cafe Master. This is designed to work with the Alcremie that we'll talk about in just a sec. You choose up to 3 of your bench Pokemon, and for each of those Pokemon you search for a different type of basic energy from the deck, attach it to that Pokemon. The catch is that this ends your turn for doing that, but if you have Alcremie in play, which is a 90 HP 1 prize Psychic Pokemon, it does not end your turn, so long as the Alcremie is in the active spot. This is very similar to Steven's Resolve and the Metagross that he had associated with him, but this thing is supposed to be its own attacker in its own right. For a double turbo energy, it does 10 plus 40 for each different type of basic energy on all of your Pokemon. So it's kind of like a Ho-Oh style attack, but it works with all of your Pokemon in play, which is why the Cafe Master ends up being pretty good. Cafe Master itself is a triple energy accelerant, which is kind of not so when you think about it, but it has to be of different types, which makes it very difficult to build with, and realistically, if you have like 6 Pokemon energies in play with this thing, like all of different types, it's 250 damage. That's still not quite enough, right? You still need a choice belt on top of that. It's so much work for very little overall payoff, but it is levelable, searchable. There is at least that going for it, so, you know, maybe you could try it. It'd be fun, but I don't think it's going to be beating any of the like main decks that we'll see here. So, almost honorable mention, but it's a cool enough concept that I wanted to fully mention it anyway. Charon's Care is Acerola, but for colorless Pokemon. You put one of your colorless Pokemon with any damage counters in it, on it even, and all cards attached to it into the hand. So Arceus at 280 HP is pretty difficult to KO. A lot of them will also play Big Charm in order to get to 310, which is pretty hard to take out in one shot for most decks, even with Choice Belt, especially because of Double Turbo Energy lowering damage as well. This then means that the Arceus itself can get picked up and added back to the hand alongside all of its energy, alongside the tool card as well, and if you're using pure Arceus, you could just evolve the next one that you charged up the previous turn on the bench. You can charge it up with Trinity Nova before, then Charon's Care, the active, and evolve the old one, the previous one, into the Arceus V that you just, V-Star you picked up. It's really good. Just the typical sort of healing thing, but this time without discarding all the energy, which is super strong in its own right. Cynthia's Ambition is a pretty solid card. You draw until you only have 5 cards in hand, which is not very many. You're usually not going to get a super huge amount out of that. But if one of your Pokemon was KO'd during the opponent's last turn, you draw until you have 8 instead. And that is super significant. Draw until 8 is a crazy effect. Usually that's going to net you like 6 cards. And a draw 6 on a supporter is something that you really need to take into account. This is most often used with Rapid Strike Malamar in place of the Bruno that I played before. This is just a strictly better version of that card, but it can be used as a one-off in other stuff as well, especially if you can search it, which we will get to in the Pokemon section. Pretty good card overall, very good full arts on this as well. Gloria is kind of one of those what-if cards. It searches your deck for up to 3 basic Pokemon that don't have rule boxes and puts them onto the bench. This does not allow you to get Pokemon V as at the moment and any other like Prism Stars, say, in Expanded. This card is insane, but it is too difficult to get to. You could run a copy to search it, but if you're using a Drizzile, say, to search for this, you're probably down too many like turns already. You should probably just run VIP pass at that point. But it's really close to being good, and I just kind of wish it was a little bit like quicker, because you don't want to play 4 copies of this, right? It's useless later on. I don't know, it's a tough one. Roseanne's backup is a very unique card. I think it's mostly used in control decks, but there's a lot of decks that could take advantage of this one. You get 4 different shuffles from your discard pile that you can choose any number of to do. You get a Pokemon tool, a stadium, and an energy card from your discard pile. Any 1 to 4 of those can get shuffled back into the deck. This does say energy card, so you can use it to recover special energy. That's probably the main reason you would run this. But tools and stadiums also don't have ways of being recollected at the moment. So it's a pretty unique card. If you're relying on like multiple like choice band or multiple different tool cards or something, and you only have 1 copy of them, you could probably use it for that. If you use, even Mew would love to use this, right? Because you recover Fusion Strike energy alongside probably choice band at this point, and also one of your singleton stadiums that you've been playing, because you don't want to have multiple copies of the same one most of the time. So it could work there as well. Very versatile card. Team Yell's Cheer is similarly versatile, but for different reasons. This is a rebalanced version of Lusamine, where you shuffle up to 3 in any combination of supporters and Pokemon from your discard pile back into the deck. It excludes itself, however. You are not allowed to shuffle any copies of Team Yell's Cheer back into the deck, which the idea is to prevent the Lusamine loops that we had before. This is fine. It does come up in some control decks or some decks that are trying to go infinite. It's mostly usable with Silene from next set, because that could recover this and then you've got an infinite loop going. If you're only looking to recover supporter cards, you should probably just use Palpad. But if you're looking at something that could potentially get 1 Pokemon and 2 supporters back, this could be the one you have to play. Pretty good card overall. Collapse Stadium is a really good card. This forces players down to 4 bench Pokemon only. If you have 5 or more bench, you have to discard 1 in order to get to 4. This is good against Mew, obviously, because that prevents them from having the full 6 in order to draw up till that, but it's also just pretty good at removing liabilities from your own bench too. You can max out your bench, one of which could be like a Crobat or an Eldegoss or something, and then Collapse Stadium can remove that Pokemon from play. Anything that's taken damage could also go down that sort of route too. Very good card. Magma Basin is also really good, but unfortunately fire types are just going to be gimped from next set onward, so we will see some use out of it this set. Don't expect it as much in the future. Once per turn, you can attach a fire energy from the discard pile to one of your benched fire Pokemon and put 2 damage counters on that Pokemon. There are fire Pokemon that will take advantage of that. We will talk about one of them in just a moment, but overall it's just energy acceleration, right? Energy acceleration stadiums are not something we see very often, and whenever they are seen, they are insanely powerful. So the effect is really good, but fire as a whole is just a little bit undercooked at the moment, and yeah, it's not enough by itself, but wherever you see fire types, you will see this. It's a very strong card. Finally, they did try and give single prizes a bone here. Pot Helmet, when it's attached to a non-rule box Pokemon, will reduce damage it takes by 30, which is good, but the problem is that overkilling by 30 is not that difficult, right? The average HP of a basic single prizer is between 110 and 130. Every single attack in the format can do 160 at the moment. Even the single prizes can do 160. Like almost every relevant attack already does that, so there's very little that it's going to block there. If you use it on the stage 2 or something, then it might be okay. They have like 150 to 190-ish HP, and maybe the top end will survive that, but for the most part, even they are still going to get one shot. So it's not enough. Unfortunately, the HP disparity is so high at the moment that this doesn't do anything. And I hate saying that, because this would have gone hard in some of the previous generations, right? I think even Gen 6 or something, this would have gone insane there. But even considering the last one, for most of Generation 7's existence, this would have done really well too. But now the numbers are so inflated that it's just not good enough, which is depressing, to be honest. On to the Pokemon! We have Charizard VSTAR coming up here. We do have a new Charizard V that isn't from like Darkness Ablaze, but it's not particularly worth noting, so we'll just talk about the VSTAR here. Although do note that you can evolve into either the VSTAR or the VMAX individually, so that's pretty good for versatility's sake. 280 HP, 2 retreat, so air balloon compatible. I believe the original Charizard was a free energy retreat, so this one is a bit more nimble, which is pretty good. For 2 fire and a colorless, you do 130 damage, but if it has any damage counters on it, you do 100 more. So this is clearly designed to be used with the Magma Basin, where you accelerate to it on the bench, and then it does 230, 260 with a choice belt. That's really, really strong. Star Blaze is the VSTAR power. This is an attack that takes free fire and a colorless, but it does a massive 320 damage and then discards 2 of the energy from the Charizard. 320 is enough to KO a lot of VMAXs. With a choice belt, it's enough to KO basically all of them. I don't remember if there's one that has a damage reduction ability, because I don't think there is. So this might just KO every single VMAX in the game, which is a good trade, right? We're giving up 2 prizes on this guy, and we are taking 3 prizes if we are killing a VMAX, which is really, really good. Yeah, if you can get to use his power, super strong. Sai is going to play this one this time out. Very good card. Raichu has seen a lot of play even as recently as in Miraidon decks. This guy is only 200 HP, but he does have a 1 retreat, so he is pretty easy to get in and out of play. If you do happen to lead with this thing, for 1 lightning energy, you can use this attack on the first turn, and you search your deck for a lightning energy to attach to the Raichu, which then builds up for Dynamic Spark on the second turn. For 2 lightning, you discard any amount of lightning energy across your board and do 60 damage for each one discarded. This is where it tends to get used in Miraidon decks, because this can function very well with some lucky electric generators that will happen to hit 2, and you can discard excess energy to do like 300 damage or whatever you need to do to score like a big EX knockout or something. It's really cool, and it's useful for Flaffy Box at the moment as well. If you could get enough Flaffies in play, you could do quite a lot of damage with this. Not a bad card in the slightest. Leafeon VSTAR is 260 HP VSTAR. It's a split line, obviously, from the VMAX, just like Charizard is. And yeah, we get a new Leafeon that we could evolve from, but it's much worse than Greening Cells, so we don't care about that one. For 2 grass and a colorless, this does 180 damage, and during the next turn it takes 30 less from attacks. Not too bad as far as tanking goes. It is an evolution, so you might be able to shower with it, but it's a little bit expensive on the energy cost for that, so I don't know if that's going to be good. Its VSTAR power, if you don't need to use Star Portal during setup, lets you gust up one of the opponent's Pokemon. It's boss's orders on an ability, which is obviously very strong. So you could use it as a one-on just for that in itself. Pretty respectable card, to be honest. It's a little bit underpowered maybe, but it does deal with any Grass Weak Dark types, which are quite relevant, so yeah, it's alright. Glaceon, on the other hand, doesn't have nearly as many advantages as Leafeon. The basic V that it evolves from just gets to Ascension it out of the deck, which is not super great. Icicle Shot for the same energy cost as the Leaf Guard does the same amount of damage at 180, prevents the opponent from retreating next turn, but that's not particularly relevant most of the time. And its VSTAR power is an attack, which is the same energy cost, 2 water and a colorless, 220 damage, and next turn it is an agility. It prevents all effects of attacks and damage done to it, which is neat. It's like Swift Run from Jolteon GX, but much bigger, but it's still not enough, and it just doesn't have a good split line to go with either. Glaceon VMAX looks even worse now that V-Stars have coming in, because it doesn't get immunity from those, so it's just not great. There are just better water types that you can use, unfortunately. Suicune is the gold star for waters at the moment. This just doesn't even come close. So, yeah, I wanted to note them as a pair, but Glaceon once again getting the short end of the stick. What can you do? Moltres is kind of interesting. 120 HP single prizer. This is very reminiscent of Zapdos from Team Up. If the opponent has any damage counters on them for 1 fire energy, you do 20 plus 70 more, so 90 total. It's not affected by weakness, which is a bit of a bummer, but fire weakness is not crazy relevant anyway. Grass is just not a very good type in general at the moment, and metal Pokemon, they do exist. There are a few that you could hit with this, but it's not that bad really. This is really good at taking out the setup Pokemon though. If you can ping something like a Drizzile, then you could easily take it out with this. So that's going to be your goal with this kind of thing. It's pretty solid, especially with a 1 energy retreat here. If you don't die, then it's easy to get out the active again, but you probably need a little bit of setup for this thing. Oh, I actually misread it. It's if this Pokemon has any damage counters on it. That makes it a lot better, actually, because then you don't have to, like, use Zigzagoon on it. You just need to Magma Basin, which is way better. So, yeah, if you Magma Basin attach to this thing, then sure, it's only got 100 HP, but it's doing 90, it's killing the opponent's setup mon, and that's often enough to like stay even in the early game, and then build up your larger Pokemon as you go. Strong card, actually. Honchkrow V is designed to work with the Pachirisu in this set. We'll talk about the Pachirisu first, because this is the return of Tool Drop, kind of. For 1 Lightning in the colorless, this 70 HP basic does 30 for each tool card that's attached to all of your Pokemon. Unlike the Trubbish, it does not count the opponent's Pokemon, which is a shame, but normally you do like 180 for a Lightning colorless. Not too bad. You can put experience shares and have maybe Flaffy or something down as well. You could get a bunch out of that. But if you put any of these Honchkrow V down, it's just like the Sigilif and the Tool Drop deck, where it does has the ability to put 4 tool cards on itself, which is kind of neat. Some disadvantages compared to before though. This is a 200 HP 2 prize Pokemon. The fact of it is a 2 prize Pokemon means that Path to the Peak will immediately stop this from working, which is unfortunate because then you have to discard most of the tools. And, well, 200 HP is definitely not what it used to be. This is very easy to KO, unfortunately. But you could make some fun stuff with it, like with Cape of Toughness, you'd be able to put all 4 of them on, turn it into a 400 HP thing. That's kind of funny. If you put enough choice belts on, you could do some pretty funny math with it, but 2 dark and a colorless is way too expensive to attack with. So even against Mew, I don't think this would really work, but it is rather amusing, so there is that going for it. Raikou and Entei get their Pokemon cards here as well, like Suicune is the one we had before. They all do the same thing. They have varying HP and retreat costs. The Raikou is the frailest at 200 HP, but only has 1 retreat. Suicune was 210 HP, but had a 2 energy retreat. And the Entei goes up to 230 HP, but it does trade off with a 3 energy retreat cost. They all can draw a card once per turn if they're in the active spot, and for their type of energy plus 1 colorless, they all do 20 plus 20 more for each bench Pokemon in play. So the cap is 220. Raikou sees quite a lot of play, some of it for Flaffy, later on for Lost Box, and then later still for Miraidon. All 3 of those decks were really strong. Suicune, of course, was its own deck and is still pretty good in this particular format because it's just a solid basic hitter that's pretty easy to power up. And the Entei doesn't see a ton of play immediately because Fire is not the most coveted type right now. But with Magma Basin, this one's the easiest one to accelerate to, which is pretty good. And, you know, you could use Melanie for Suicune, but that's a supporter card. This at least can use Stadium to do it, which is solid. And it actually had its own deck, I think, with Iron Valiant when Paradox... was it Paradox Rift first came out? Or Temporal Forces, one of the two. It's the one when the future stuff like started being a thing. It did initially have some good success with the Iron Valiant, so that was kind of cool. See some play in stuff like Charizard as well. Very good card, worth keeping an eye on. Flygon is a very strange card. Definitely needs Arceus to work. 220 HP Dragon type, so no weakness on this thing is pretty useful. 2 retreat, Airballoon compatible. And you might need that too, because its useful attack is Draconic Impulse. For a grass, 2 fighting and a colorless energy, it only does 160 damage, but if you're against a Pokemon VMAX, it doubles that damage and then discards free energy from this Pokemon. 320 with a Choice Belt does KO all of the VMAXs, so you could kind of read this as like a Charizard VSTAR attack, right? But it's a massive energy investment for it, and a fighting dominant thing too. It's not the worst because fighting is a good thing to have, and grass you could maybe justify with Single Stripe Beedrill. Maybe you could build a deck that way. But man, is this card hard to work, and it's very situational too, right? If the opponent isn't playing VMAXs, this card is as good as dead. So it's so difficult to work with. I'm not entirely convinced on this one, but I have seen a list with it. It's at least interesting. Maybe it kills Mew VMAX in one shot, I suppose, so there is that going for it. I don't know. Dusknoir gets the interesting card here. I don't think it's super worth building a stage 2 into your deck for, but you can transfer special energy around your board as much as you want. So it's energy trans, but for specials but in particular. It's kind of fun. You could do some neat stuff with it, but most of the time your special energy is kind of locked into where it needs to be anyway, and it's not that relevant. So yeah, cool card, not super worth it. Grotle and Torterra in particular are kind of interesting. It's a shame that Grotle is 100 HP here, because if it was 90 this would be so much better for level ball searching, but it is 100 HP. I guess we have Turffield Stadium we could search it with, that's a thing. Once during your turn you may search your deck for a grass Pokemon, put it into the hat. We have seen this ability not be very good before, but we've also seen this kind of ability be absolutely insane. It really depends on what is around it, right? Like, Heart Gold, Soul Silver, Sunflora ended up being not very good, despite Jumpluff being an obvious partner for it. This evolves into something that benefits from that power, though, which is where it kind of comes back around to being decent, because we've seen Gabite in the past was actually pretty good, because the Garchomp was strong as well. Torterra is similar, but just a little bit short in my opinion. A colossal 190 HP, this is the biggest single prizer I think that we have in the format, which is a bit sad to say, but there you go. Evo Press is the main attack here. For a grass and a colorless, it does 50 for each evolution that you have in play. I wish it wasn't for a grass and a colorless though. I think if this was for DCE, this would actually be insane, and I think it would be worth building a deck around. With a grass and a colorless though, this means you've got to pay 2 attaches for it, or somehow build a thin Torterra line in here or something. Not Torterra, Rillaboom, which is just not happening, right? It's even for nowadays, building one stage 2 into a deck is difficult. Like Inteleon kind of gets away with it solely as a support engine most of the time. This though, being the attacker, nah, it's too much, unfortunately. It's sad to say, but it is part of the way the modern game is. Maybe if this had 260 HP or something, we'd be talking, but that's not the way the game is built, so it is what it is. It's a shame it's not for Twin though, because Twin Energy and Double Turbo would both be very strong for this. The theoretical damage cap here is 300, right? So with a Choice Belt you could do 330 and KO everything in the game. That's really cool. Most of the time you're going to have a support basic in play as well though, so it's not quite going to get there. But even then, 250 on a single prizer for 2 energy would be super good. It's just too much to ask, unfortunately. It's too bad. I really don't want to say that this is bad, but some people will try and cook with it. It just isn't going to see Tony's success, I'm afraid. Unlike the next card, Bieberl, this card is not a butters. I've been wanting this one for a long time, to be honest. This is our replacement for Silvally, or prior to that, Octillery. 2 retreat cost, 120 HP, so Air Balloon compatible is very nice for it. Industrious Incisors draws until you have 5 cards in hand, once per Bieberl. Really, really good. So yeah, a lot of Arceus decks will play this immediately. A lot of decks in general will play this, and it's just a super good card throughout any format more or less. Yeah, it's insane. Draw power is always really good. This kind of effect didn't see play with Silvally, but I think that's because of A, it was a 2-prizer, and B, it came out when VMAXs and stuff were a thing, and ADP kind of ruined it as well, because ADP turned it into a free prize liability, it just wasn't strong enough. But this one? Yeah, this has got everything going for it at this point. Evo Incense and Ultra Ball both make it searchable as well. Very, very strong. Love this card. There is a Wormadam trio over here, which all have the Matron's Anger attack. For a twin energy, this does 30 plus 10 for each Pokemon in your discard pile. There is, of course, the Leaf, the Plant Cloak, which is the Grass type, the Sandy Cloak, which is the Fighting type. This one's the most relevant because of the weakness. And then there's the Trash Cloak, which is the Metal type. None of the other attacks really matter, it's all about Matron's Anger here. This is a funny card for the Zoroark deck, where Zoroark's Phantom Transformation turns itself, by discarding it, it turns itself into a stage 1 from your discard pile, and then you can attach a twin or double turbo to this thing and do a ton of damage on a single prizer. The Zoroark discarding itself fuels the attack a little bit as well. It's pretty cool. It doesn't really see tournament play, but it's a cool little deck that you could build. Zoroark will gradually get more and more tools as the format progresses, and it ends up being at least interesting. So it's worth noting for that alone. Lucario is kind of a cool card. This is a stage 1 version of the Charizard that was in Gen 7, the Theme Deck King, if you will. 120 HP. Kind of annoying that it's not 130 because you put 2 damage counters on this guy and search your deck for 1 Fighting Energy card to attach to this Pokemon. The Charizard could get 2 Fire Energies, so there is an annoying difference there, but considering it's a stage 1, it's a bit easier to set up, I can kind of forgive it. The attack is the same though for 2 Fighting Energy this time. Aura Sphere Volley discards all Fighting Energy from this Pokemon and does 10 plus 60 for each one you discarded this way. So a minimum of 130. If you put a Choice Belt on this thing, that gets the KO on Arceus V, which is the main goal that you would have. I think it KOs Gengar VMAX as well actually, because that's a free 20 HP dude. So yeah, you get some relevant stuff that way. Fighting as a solo type is kind of annoying, and because it isn't a Pokemon B, you can't accelerate to it with anything like Arceus, which is a bit of a problem, but it's still pretty strong, excuse me. Still a pretty strong attack to have on a single prizer, and if you're expecting Arceus to be as dominant as it is here, then it's a reasonable card to build around if you already have like another fighting thing that you're wanting to play. Luminion V is really good. 170 HP, it is the return of Tapu Lele. You bench this thing from the hand and you get to search your deck for a supporter card, put it into the hand. Ultimately, super good. For a water and a twin energy, or double turbo I guess is the other one for this, Aqua Return does 120 and then shuffles itself and all cards attached to it back into the deck. That attack actually gets used in a few different decks as you go along, mostly Lugia V, but it does see play in some Lost Box decks as well, being able to search out like Chorus's Experiment or your one-of Roxanne or something that we'll get to in the future, and being able to also attack and keep your 2 prizer off the board is pretty good. This is one of the prime targets that Collapse Stadium would be used to discard as well, but it's pretty mobile if you do happen to start with it. And if you're playing water, well, maybe Melanie plus a double turbo or something can get it to attack, get it off the board, then you can search it out later on again and get another supporter when you need to. Very cool card. Manaphy is the replacement to Mew. It prevents all bench damage done from your opponent's Pokemon to your Pokemon, and that's basically it. It's a single retreat cost mon, it doesn't really do anything with its attack this time. It's certainly not as good as Mew in that aspect, but it's bench barrier, and therefore it is insane. Very cool character art on this one as well. Shaman V and VSTAR are very similar here. Flap is kind of useless, so we'll just talk about the rest of the card here. 190 HP that transitions to 250 when you evolve, and for a Grass and a Colorless it does Revenge Blast. The base one is 60 plus 40 for each prize the opponent's taken. The VSTAR goes to 120 plus 40. The VSTAR power on Shaman VSTAR is, like I mentioned earlier, heal 120 from each of your benched grass Pokemon. Not a very good VSTAR power, if I'm being honest with you, and like the plus 60 damage is kind of relevant, but considering the extra hoops that you have to go through to get this thing in play, I think if you're ever going to see any of them, it is going to be the regular V. because it is just more applicable. Really dislike this artwork though, it just does not, like the balloon does not work with this thing whatsoever, so I probably won't play it, but it's worth noting that Revenge Blast is back, right? This is what Shaman Skyform tends to do quite a lot in its 2 prizes, so there you go. If it's not ruining the format with card draw, it's Revenge Blasting everything. Lipard is a pretty cool card for the Eternatus decks. This is Cinccino, but on a slightly bulkier Dart type, which is annoying to be honest, but 100 HP means it's outside the level ball range, but when Cinccino rotates, this is the replacement. Discard a card from the hand and draw 2. It's literally Zoroark's ability. Does not have the attack of Zoroark GX though, so it's not as good that way, but considering Eternatus can only play Dart Pokemon, this can be a consistent single prize draw engine for that deck, so that's kinda cool. Whimsicott V has one of the funnest attack names to say in the recent sets here. It's 190 HP that evolves into a 250 HP V-Star, both of which with a single retreat cost, and is basically here to be disruptive. For a single Psychic Energy, Fluff gets in the way. Great attack name to say. 20 damage, and if the opponent is a basic Pokemon, then they cannot attack during the next turn, so you force them to switch out. This is a metal weak Psychic type as well, so it doesn't fall into the same problem as most Psychic types do, which is the Dark weakness being a pain. When you evolve, because the second attack is kind of useless here really, when you evolve, for a Psychic and a Twin Energy you do 160, and during the opponent's next turn, they can't play any tools or special energy cards from their hand. It's 2/3 of what Giratina EX did with its Chaos Wheel. It does do quite a respectable amount of damage. 140 after using a double turbo energy is kind of okay, and yeah, it's mostly there to try and stop how like many special energies and stuff are played at the moment. This like kind of shuts down a lot of new VMAX decks if you can get this in before they play like double turbo down or something. If they're not playing Fusion Strike energy and they can't Ellis's, they die. Fluffball Star for a single Psychic Energy snipes 60 for each energy that's on this Pokemon. So it can finish off things, which is kind of neat, but it's not the strongest attack out there. If you have the energy to do Trick Wind, it is Snipe 180, but it doesn't come with the disruption of Trick Wind, so it's not super good in my opinion. Minccino is being noted even though it's got less HP than the other one, because it has Call for Family. Search your deck for it to do basics, put them onto bench. This is the better Minccino to play if you are going to play a Cinccino engine, and some decks still do, so it is pretty useful. Tornadus is intriguing. This is like the Holucha that we saw before. When you bench this thing, you force the opponent to switch. It's a repel, not a gust, so it's kind of limited, but it does see sporadic use here and there. And I mean, you could discard it with Collapse Stadium as well, so it's alright. Worth noting just because it's neat. Ice-Q is a Fusion Strike Pokemon. We do get 1 or 2 of them as we go forward, and this one is noteworthy for its Block Slider attack. 40 damage to one of the opponent's Pokemon for each Fusion Strike energy on all of your Pokemon. So while Meloetta is the nuke one that does 70 for each to the active specifically, this does 40 anywhere, so you can snipe up to 160 with this. It's another versatile option for Fusion Mew to play. You could play one each of Meloetta and this, and or 2 Meloetta and 1 of this if you're confident in keeping Fusion Energy in play. And it's pretty cool. If you copy this with Mew using a double turbo energy on that Mew, you could snipe up to 140, which is still pretty good. So yeah, strong card. Also gives Mew a reason why it could use Telescopic Sight if it wanted to as well. So it could one-shot Luminion and Crobat on the bench. Last 2 cards to note here, there's a Zamazenta V. There's not a Zacian V in this set, which is interesting. Zamazenta V has 220 HP this time, only a 2 retreat this as well, which is kind of neat. I think the last one also was 2 retreat, but just good to note because Air Balloon. This one is pretty good. Regal Stance lets you once per turn discard your hand and draw 5. It does end your turn for doing it, but if you do this on the first turn, going first, then that's kind of cool. And it has Revenge Blast. yeah, Shaman's not the only one that has it for whatever reason. Metal and Twin Energy does 120 and does 30 more for each prize card the opponent has taken. So it's okay. One of the Arceus decks I'm going to play this time does have one copy of this card in it. Probably because of the Whimsicott deck, to be honest, but it does kind of just stack up. If the opponent's taken 4 prizes, this is 240 damage, right? Which is pretty respectable. So, yeah, and also it can be a bit of consistency going first. Something you don't always have. Finally, the Zarude is pretty cool. This time it is a 220 HP dude with 2 retreat. Leap to Leap is a retrained Jet Punch over here, 30 damage for a Grass Energy and 30 to one of the opponent's bench, or Hammerhead was the first one in this thing, right? Jungle Rage is kind of cool though. For 2 Grass and a Colorless you do 120, but if your opponent's active as a Pokemon V, double that damage. 240 is respectable. It's not quite enough even with the bonus damage of Choice Belt to do a one-shot on like V-Stars or anything. At least most of them, right? But if you snipe them a little bit first with Leap to Leap, you could probably get some cool stuff going there. I think the problem with doing that is you're going to need to use this with Arceus, right? And so you don't really have the opportunity to do Leap to Leap very often. So that's kind of annoying. But I think the card is solid. It's got decent potential. Maybe with Cape of Toughness to make it 270 HP, you could survive a hit more often than not. And yeah, 240 is not a bad number. Gust in a Genesect or something and just wipe it out, right? So it's decent. You could build around it. I don't think people did, but like you could build around it. So worth noting anyway. And that is the set. It's a really good one, to be honest. Like I said, a lot of cards here that are worth noting. And I did maybe have a couple of extra things I could have included in here. Marnie's Pride itself I did briefly mention, but it's like energy acceleration for the discard. Problem is Raihan just kind of does that better. There's a Drudagon that revenges for 160, but it takes 2 different color energy, which is kind of annoying. And then yeah, like artwork appreciation for stuff like the Sneasel. I think it's really cool. There's Luxray that if it wasn't exactly a stage 2 would have probably been really strong. Lots of fun stuff to go over here. So I like this set a lot, and I think we're going to have a decent bit of fun with this one, even if a lot of the cards are like Arceus focused. It doesn't really matter, right? Because Arceus itself is such a malleable thing, and it's just a fun deck to build with. So even to this day, like 6 sets into Gen 9 when Pokemon V stopped getting printed, Arceus decks still pop up from now time to time. It's just that strong, right? Thank you very much for listening to this though. Hopefully you have found it interesting. And next time, we'll see what cool, crazy stuff we can build with the God of all Pokemon, right? See you then.